Jason was enjoying a quiet morning fishing at a serene lake when something unexpected caught his attention. The sun was still low, casting a golden shimmer across the water's surface. Birds chirped lazily in the trees, and a soft breeze rustled the reeds along the shoreline. For the first time in weeks, he and his son Eli were able to get out of the house together. It felt special to see a hint of light return to Eli's eyes. Eli sat beside him on the old wooden dock, his feet dangling just above the water while he held a thermos of cocoa that Jason had packed that morning. They hadn't talked much, and Jason didn't push for conversation. Given the tough year they'd endured after losing Melissa, it was enough just to sit together in silence. As Jason reeled in his line, he checked the bait, noting how quiet the morning was, almost too quiet. The gentle lapping of the lake against the dock created a soothing stillness around them. Eli sat cross-legged next to him, his chin tucked into his hoodie, cradling the thermos between his knees. Although Eli was focused on the water, Jason noticed a flicker of life returning to his son's small face, the first real signs of brightness since the day of Melissa's funeral. Jason cherished this silence, feeling it was filled with a sense of healing. Suddenly, Eli leaned forward and pointed toward a ripple near the edge of the lake. "Over there," he said, his voice soft yet filled with curiosity. Following Eli's gaze, Jason smiled faintly. "Nice spot," he replied, adjusting his stance to cast his line in that direction. With practiced ease, the line flew through the air and landed in the water with a quiet plunk. Then, a sound emerged. It was faint at first, barely rising above the rustling reeds and the distant bird songs. It was a rustling noise, like something moving awkwardly through tall grass. Jason straightened up, keeping his rod still in one hand while raising the other to hush Eli. The rustling grew louder, accompanied by a high-pitched cry that didn't sound like any bird or raccoon he had ever heard. It was a desperate, pleading sound. Standing up, Jason momentarily forgot about his fishing rod as he scanned the tree line, his brow furrowed in concern. Eli stood beside him, instinctively gripping Jason's fingers. Without exchanging a word, they stepped off the dock, their feet crunching gently on dried pine needles and soft moss. They ducked beneath a low branch, pushed through a thin veil of brush, and emerged into the unknown. In a small clearing, something gray and small barely stirred against the earth. It was no larger than a loaf of bread, huddled and shivering. As they approached, the creature struggled to lift its head. Its delicate features revealed that it was undeniably wild, with triangular ears adorned with tiny tufts, wide pale eyes, and a nose that quivered as it sniffed the air. Jason stopped in his tracks, his voice barely a whisper. "Bobcat!" His disbelief was clear. "It's a bobcat cub." The cub let out a faint cry, appearing broken and desperate. Surprisingly, it began to stagger toward them, not away. Eli tugged at Jason's sleeve, urgency in his voice. "Where's its mom? Why is it alone?" Jason knelt down, his heart heavy. "I don't know, but she's in trouble." As the little cub reached him, it collapsed at his feet, its sides heaving with shallow breaths. Jason took a closer look. Her fur was matted, grime stuck beneath her tiny claws, and her eyes were glassy with exhaustion. She was far too young to be without her mother. Without thought, he removed his jacket and gently wrapped her in it. The cub didn't resist. She nestled deeper into the fabric, as if she sensed that this human was her sanctuary. Eli crouched beside him, eyes filled with concern. "Can we help her?" he asked, nearly breathless, as if the thought of not helping hadn't crossed his mind. Jason opened his mouth to respond when a rustle caught their attention, more forceful this time. From the trees, another cub emerged, larger and alert, yet weary. Its fur bristled as it took a defensive stance, yellow eyes locked onto the bundle Jason held. It let out a low growl, not aggressive, but protective. Jason remained still, cradling the first cub carefully, understanding the significance of the moment. "Her brother," he murmured to Eli. The second cub cautiously moved closer, muscles tensed and nostrils flaring. Then, as quickly as it advanced, it turned and dashed back into the forest, disappearing among the underbrush like a shadow. "Wait," Eli called out, taking a step in pursuit, but Jason gently restrained him. "No," he replied, firm yet calm. "If he's strong enough to run, he might be okay. But this one," he looked down at the fragile creature wrapped in his jacket. "She wouldn't survive another night out here," and the weight of the situation settled heavily on both of them. Jason carefully shifted the weight of the Bobcat Cub and began walking back toward the truck, while Eli walked quietly beside him, glancing back at the trees. The woods had quieted down, as if they were hiding the other cub away. They packed their gear in silence, with neither of them paying attention to the fishing rods or tackle. The calmness of the morning had given way to a sense of urgency, something fragile yet alive. Once they reached the truck, Jason gently placed the bundled cub on the back seat and adjusted the air vents to keep her warm. Eli climbed in beside her and buckled his seatbelt without being prompted, his gaze fixed on the little form nestled against the blanket. As they drove away from the lake, the truck rumbled to life, tires crunching on the gravel. Jason drove slowly, stealing glances between the road and the rearview mirror. The cub hadn't moved much, her breathing still uneven, and occasionally a small shudder would ripple through her. Back at their cozy home near the edge of town, Jason prepared a quiet area in the laundry room. He used an old crate, thick towels, and a few well-worn blankets that had seen better days. The room felt warm and slightly musty from the dryer, but it was a safe haven, exactly what the cub needed. He found a heating pad in the attic, set it to low, and tucked it beneath the bedding. The cub emitted a barely audible sound, a faint response that hinted at the spark of life within her. Next, Jason warmed some milk on the stove, carefully testing its temperature on his wrist before pouring it into a small bowl. He rummaged through a drawer until he found an old syringe from their days of fostering stray kittens. Eli stood beside him, his eyes focused on every movement, remaining quiet but engaged, just like he used to do when Melissa baked, soaking up every bit of knowledge in silence. They crouched beside the crate with the soft light from the overhead bulb stretching their shadows long on the floor. Jason gently nudged the cub closer and slowly brought the syringe to her mouth. At first, she turned her head weakly, her tiny body trembling with the effort. But then she sniffed the air, hesitated, and opened her mouth. The first few drops of milk were uncertain, but soon she began to suckle hungrily, her front paws twitching as if yearning for something she had lost. Eli exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Eli held his breath, watching as Ember, the little bobcat cub, let out a soft grunt and snuggled into the blanket. Slowly, her eyes fluttered and then shut, her tiny body rising and falling in a steady rhythm. "She's so small," he whispered, crouched down so close that his nose almost touched the edge of the crate. "Do you think she was scared?" Jason sat nearby, leaning against the dryer and feeling the fatigue of the day settle into his shoulders. He turned to his son, noticing the worry in Eli's voice and the compassion behind it. "Yeah," Jason replied softly. "I think she was very scared, but not anymore." In the days that followed, their routine quietly began to revolve around Ember. Each morning started with mixing formula and cleaning her crate, while every evening ended with her soft purring and the gentle thump of her paws as she explored her corner of the house. Eli named her Ember, saying it was because she looked like fire that had almost gone out. The name stuck. Jason had reached out to local wildlife rescues, only to hear the same answer each time: they were full. The closest licensed rehab center was far away and overwhelmed. Transporting Ember would be risky, and no one nearby could care for a cub her age. Even their trusted vet repeated the same message, but with a note of wonder. "She's lucky you found her," he said to Jason. "Or maybe you're the lucky one." Jason took a break from work, telling himself it was just temporary, just until they found a place for Ember. But deep down, he sensed it was more than that. Eli immersed himself in the daily care of Ember, measuring her formula to the tiniest detail and learning how to weigh her with the kitchen scale. Together, they built a second crate with higher walls when she started climbing out of the first. Eli gently brushed Ember with an old toothbrush to mimic grooming, and even taught her to chase a sock attached to a string. Every day, she pounced and leapt with increasing skill, her muscles growing stronger, her paws becoming quicker and more clever. Jason noticed a change in Eli. Once quiet and withdrawn after Melissa's passing, Eli now smiled without encouragement. He asked questions again, laughed softly and genuinely, and even stopped waking up in tears. "She follows you everywhere," Eli remarked one afternoon, humor in his voice, as Ember trotted behind Jason. As she made her way down the hallway, the small Bobcat Cub stumbled a bit on the hardwood floor. She paused, looking up at Jason, as if she were waiting for him to make the next move. Jason couldn't help but smile. "Maybe she thinks I'm her dad," he joked. Illy was quiet for a moment before she looked up at him. "She probably needed one," she replied softly. Jason felt the weight of those words. He glanced at his son and saw a shadow of loss there, a burden no child should have to bear, though it was softened by a glimmer of hope. "We all need someone," he said gently, "even wild creatures." One stormy night, thunder rattled the windows and rain hammered down in sheets. Ember, who had been growing more independent, suddenly seemed frightened and restless. She paced in her crate, her ears pinned back and her tail bristled. Eli burst into Jason's bedroom, eyes wide. He held Ember tightly, as if she were a fragile treasure. "She's scared," he said, breathless as he climbed onto the bed. Jason pulled the blanket back, inviting them in. "Then bring her here." Eli nestled beside him, and Ember curled up between them. Jason turned off the lamp, letting the darkness wrap around them. Ember settled, her trembling gradually easing until she finally fell asleep. Eli, however, stayed awake, staring at the ceiling as lightning illuminated the room. His voice was soft when he finally spoke. "I miss Mom." Jason turned to his son, placing a hand on his shoulder. "I do too," he said, "every day." They fell into a long silence. Eli's voice cracked. "She would have loved Ember." Jason nodded in agreement. "She would have." And there they were, surrounded by the chaos of the storm outside, while something fragile and healing began to blossom between father and son, joined by the presence of Ember. In the weeks that followed, Ember became an integral part of their lives, fitting into their routine as naturally as sunlight filling the kitchen. She learned to use the litter box with surprising ease and chased balled-up socks through the living room. Sometimes she would drag towels from the laundry basket, claiming them as her own. Jason built a sturdy outdoor enclosure using scraps of lumber and heavy-duty fencing, adding climbing logs, a shaded box, and a layer of straw for warmth. Ember took to it as if she had always belonged there. The neighbors took notice. A bobcat wasn't something you could easily overlook. Instead of complaints, Jason often heard curiosity. One man from down the street asked if he could take pictures, while a retired biology teacher dropped off a field guide to local wildlife, sparking even more interest in Ember's new home. One day, Jason found a note on his porch which simply said, "You're doing something rare, keep going." This encouragement pushed him forward. He took the steps to become a certified wildlife caretaker. It involved a fair amount of paperwork, training, and inspections. After 3 weeks, he received approval. The local wildlife center even asked if he could share notes and videos of his experience for educational purposes. Ember's journey was beginning to expand beyond just their little home. That morning, Jason stepped outside to see Eli comfortably curled up in a hammock with a book. Ember was sprawled across him, her long legs dangling off the side, eyes closed, and purring softly. As Jason approached, her ears twitched, but she didn't stir. Jason smiled and said, "She loves you, you know." Eli looked up and asked, "Do you think she remembers where she came from?" Jason paused to consider. "Maybe, but what really matters is where she is now and who she's with." Later that night, after washing the dishes and letting the house settle into silence, Jason sat at the kitchen table, cradling a mug of now cold coffee. He pulled out an old photo album from the drawer and slowly opened it. Melissa's neat handwriting labeled each page: Eli's first birthday, camping trip 2014, snow day, lake picnic. He flipped to a page that made him stop in his tracks. There was Melissa on the dock, laughing as she held baby Eli, the serene lake painted in soft blues and greens behind them. A faint smile crossed his face as he glanced toward the living room. Ember lay curled up on the couch while Eli stroked her ear, both of them absorbed in a nature documentary. The house felt full, not merely filled with noise or activity, but with a deep sense of presence. There was a warmth inside the walls, a rhythm to their days that felt natural and unrestricted. Laughter trickled back into their lives, first in quiet whispers and then more freely, without hesitation. Jason sometimes caught himself humming while doing laundry, while Eli would crack a joke while brushing Ember's fur. The once empty rooms no longer felt silent. They were filled with the soft thud of paws, the unmistakable clink of breakfast dishes, and the excited scrape of Ember's claws against the tile. Over time, the silence that had once held them captive loosened its grip. By her 7th month, Ember had grown to over 20 pounds and could leap from one end of the yard to the other in a single bound. Jason reinforced her enclosure, adding stronger supports and locking mechanisms. As he observed her playful leaps, he felt a sense of hope and renewal in their home. Late at night, Jason watched tutorial videos about training wildlife using positive reinforcement. Slowly, Ember, the stray bobcat cub, began to respond to certain sounds, such as clicks and two-tone whistles, as well as the low, steady way Jason called her name when he needed her to come inside. Her amber eyes would light up each time she got it right, causing her to trot over and nuzzle against Jason's legs in a display of her pride. Ember established her own daily routine. Mornings started with her stretching next to Jason's boots while he enjoyed his coffee at the kitchen table, her tail lazily twitching in the morning sunlight. By mid-morning, she would be in the yard, chasing after fluttering leaves and pouncing on sticks that Eli tossed her way, all the while chasing butterflies with delightful clumsiness. In the afternoons, Ember often sprawled across the patio, lying belly up and blinking slowly at the sky, while Jason worked nearby or fixed the fence, a task he seemed to revisit often. Eli would join her, resting beside her with a book or sketch pad, occasionally brushing his fingers over her fur without even realizing it. She would comfortably nap with her head on his calf, as if that were the most natural thing in the world. Yet Jason never lost sight of what Ember truly was, a wild animal. He often reminded himself that she wasn't bred for cozy couches, porches, or warm laundry baskets. Still, Ember seemed to grasp the unspoken rules of their shared space. She had her instincts, and they had their boundaries, yet something about her remained gentle. Jason didn't need to pretend she was a house cat. She wasn't tamed, but rather loyal. She wasn't soft, yet she trusted them. It felt as if she had chosen them, that quiet, instinctive choice, filling a gap Jason hadn't realized existed. One weekend, Jason invited an old friend from work, Carl, over. Carl, a mechanic who hadn't visited since the funeral, joined Jason on the back deck, beers in hand as they caught up in the warm spring air. Eli sat nearby, sketching in a spiral notebook, while Ember lay casually draped across the porch bench, one leg hanging over the edge. When Carl noticed Ember, his mouth fell open in surprise. "That's not a house cat," he said. Jason chuckled in response. "No, she's family." Carl continued to stare as Ember yawned, her sharp, gleaming teeth visible. "Aren't you worried she'll turn on you one day?" he asked. Jason shook his head confidently, explaining, "We respect her space, and she respects ours. It's mutual." At that moment, Eli looked up from his sketchbook. "She came to us when she was lost, just like we were," he remarked. Jason was taken aback by how naturally those words flowed from his son. There was undeniable truth in what Eli said, a reminder of the bond formed in their unusual family. Eli mentioned it without a hint of sadness or drama, as if it were just a fact. Jason didn't feel the need to correct him. There was nothing to correct. One spring morning, well after the frost had finally retreated, Jason woke not to his alarm but to a familiar thump and the soft sound of paws outside his bedroom door. "Ember!" he exclaimed, smiling as he stretched. He opened the door to see her walk past him, purposefully, with her tail held high. Jason quietly followed as she padded down the hallway. She stopped at Eli's door, nudged it open with her nose, and gracefully jumped onto the bed. Peeking in, Jason noticed Eli stirring under the covers. Without fully waking, Eli lifted the blanket just enough for Ember to slip underneath. She curled up beside him, tucking her head under his chin, and soon their breathing synchronized. Jason didn't need to say anything. It was all understood. Leaning against the doorframe with his arms crossed, he enjoyed the gentle breeze that stirred the curtains, carrying the sweet sound of birds singing through the cracked window. Melissa would have cherished this moment, her son peacefully asleep, with a bobcat showing more loyalty than many people. She would have taken countless photos, laughed, cried, and kissed them both on the forehead. Though Jason felt the familiar ache in his chest, it washed over him differently now. The pain hadn't disappeared, it never would, but it no longer dictated their lives. Instead, it had softened, transformed by daily routines, love, and the unexpected wildness that had found its way into their lives, seeking just a chance to stay. Isn't it true that sometimes the best things in life come unexpectedly, curled up and shivering, with just a whisper of trust left? They don't always ask to be saved, they simply show up. In the act of saving them, you discover something within yourself that needed healing too. Jason recalled that moment at the lake, rod in hand, the gentle ripples of the water and the tiny cries emanating from the brush. That day, he hadn't caught any fish, but he had found something far more meaningful, a companion, a bond, and a reason to laugh again. A new chapter that he hadn't even dared to hope for. As Ember stretched on the bed, her paws reaching toward Eli's chin, he let out a soft laugh as she playfully bumped her head against him. With a smile, Jason turned and headed to the kitchen to begin the day. As he enjoyed his breakfast, he felt a warmth in his heart that he hadn't realized he was missing. Behind him, the sound of tiny paws softly pattered along, closely trailing his every move.